BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. And I would like to give a big thank you to everybody who visited the Black Box Online Radio Shorts page, as well as following along with the polling questions that I've been putting out. Every day on Black Box Online Radio, I now put out one polling question, and I also share one of the older episodes. And I've been noticing that you guys have been following along, as well as some people have been putting their responses in the comments section. It just adds to the discussion, so I cannot thank you enough. And a great way that you can help all of these efforts is by hitting the like button, subscribing, and also going over to BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. First, I would like to begin with something from Ken Maines, who was featured on the History Channel's The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, and he's also the host of the YouTube channel Unsolved No More. Ken Maines went on a series of true crime rants over the past couple weeks. I mean, I shouldn't say series. He released two videos that were ranting about the true crime community. One was released 3 weeks ago, and one came out 4 days ago at the time of this recording. And I'm going to play the clip, and then let's have a quick response.
It makes me almost not want to do true crime at all, have any part of it. This true crime community that has taken over the internet, 3/4 of them are the most disgusting things I've ever seen in my life. From the stuff that they promote to get clicks and views and they make money off of it, to the ones that accuse innocent people, show up on their doorstep, harass their family, to the ones that make outlandish claims and believe it. Like Adam Walsh is still alive. Make me sick. I gotta be honest with you. The level of stupidity of people that believe this. And I get shit in comments all the time. Well, are you calling me stupid? Yes! If you believe this stuff, you're stupid, because it's not true. There's no merit to it. Zero. You can make anything fit what you want. I've said this a million times. You can pick a suspect and make everything fit. Think of Zodiac. Think of how many suspects are. Richard Gatkowski, Arthur Lee Allen, Lawrence Kane, Ross Sullivan. Everything fits each one, but not all of them are the Zodiac. Probably none of them.
So he is definitely fired up, and to provide a little bit of context, what he was talking about when he said Adam Walsh was the son of John Walsh, most famous for America's Most Wanted, and some people actually would remember him more for going public and doing lots of media appearances following the death of his own son, Adam, and there was this story that Adam Walsh was not actually murdered and that he was still alive, and someone had claimed to have interviewed him, and Ken Maines was calling that out for being ridiculous. And later on in the episode, again, there are two of them, Ken Maines said that a big reason why he was going on these true crime rants was because he had received a lot of questions after the Idaho murders, which took place earlier this year. Questions that he found to be ridiculous, and he didn't get too specific about that, but that was what was making him so frustrated. The first response is, there's actually a point in there that I completely agree with. And that is that when we hear stories about people who are involved with these true crime cases, the participants, or just the focus of the story, the person who's involved with it, I do not think that it's a good idea to try and contact them, because I was listening to a different YouTuber talk about this exact subject. When you see somebody on the television, or maybe now on the internet, and you get curious about their story, and you want to ask them questions, I mostly refrain from doing that simply because the person is a private citizen. Yes, they've already shared their story in the media, and there really is a case-by-case basis that goes on with this. If you're simply just trying to write them questions because you're curious and you want to pry and get more information out of them, I think that that is mostly unacceptable. However, on the other hand, if someone wants to just write a letter of encouragement or show some support and said, I heard your story on the TV, thank you for going public, it meant so much to me, I think you're an amazing person. Okay, if you want to reach out and contact somebody that way, that is perhaps a little bit more acceptable. But I've had multiple people contact me on Black Box Online Radio saying, hey, you did an episode about me, could you please take it down? I don't want these parts of my life shared. And I said, yes, absolutely. And one time it was somebody who was a family friend of the person whom I was discussing, and once I was able to verify that person's story, yes, I took it down, because I absolutely do not want to be disrespectful in any way to the victims, or in the case of a missing person, just the person who is the subject of the story, because there might not even be a true crime incident going on. It's a missing persons case that involves a different type of tragedy. So I agree with that whole point about showing up at somebody's doorstep and trying to pry more information out of them. The next point, though, is that there are some true crime theories that are genuinely ridiculous, that are far out and wacky. And do I talk about those? Oh, yes, absolutely. Should I? Probably not, because there comes a certain point where I had to just accept that you guys in the Black Box Online Radio audience do not want to hear about them. I mean, perhaps in some corner of the internet there are people who follow along with the far out and wacky theories, but to the listeners of BBOR, you guys really do not seem to show any interest in those things at all, and if anything, if you do give feedback, it's in somewhat of a negative and critical way. And it got to the certain point where I had to recognize that I think that this theory has no credibility. You guys think that this theory has no credibility. Okay, let's just leave it for somebody else. When I started doing these regular segments like Zodiac Monday and the Anything Goes Friday segment, I would just say something like that. Anything goes, any subject is fair game. Or for Zodiac Monday, I would say that if somebody has written a book or is doing a podcast, or even if they've just shared their true crime theory on forums, if they've shared their Zodiac killer theory on a bunch of forums, then I'll talk about it. But then people sort of, I guess you'd say, they began abusing that type of open-mindedness, and then people would just send me things, like the way Ken Maines is talking about, things that would make me frustrated because they're far out, they're wacky, and I thought they have no credibility, and I know that it's not going to be well received by you guys, so it just goes into a different category. And I mean, they're welcome to share their stuff in a different corner of the internet. They can make their own YouTube channel and share their findings. They can make their own Facebook profile page. And lastly, there is something that is so true about, and that is the part about going to somebody's doorstep and accusing them of committing a crime. Now, he didn't specifically say which incident he was referring to with that one, but, I mean, we have to recognize innocent until proven guilty. And as far as the Zodiac Killer mystery goes, I think I've only ever contacted 2 people who are living Zodiac Killer suspects about their responses, and one of them was Michael O'Hare, who is the subject of the book Time 17 by Gareth Penn, and he's also discussed as one of the suspects in the book Zodiac Killer Solved by Ray Grant. And the reason why I chose to contact him was he has spoken about the case very publicly. He has spoken about being a suspect very publicly. He even authored an article for the Washington Monthly giving his side of the story. And I mean, he has dealt with this in the past, and I felt that that wasn't completely out of bounds. And I definitely did not go to his doorstep and bring a video camera and start like trying to hound him down or anything like that. But we do have to recognize that even if somebody has a theory that they are very, very sold on, I mean, they do have innocent until proven guilty. But the reason why Ken Maines put out the first video was he was talking about his frustrations with the true crime world, and in the second one, he wanted to give the clarification that yes, he's still going to make true crime content. He didn't want people to think that he is abandoning his YouTube channel Unsolved No More. He will still make true crime videos, but he wants to focus on older cases that are not going to deal with the same type of contemporary issues, such as the homicides that took place in Idaho earlier this year. But right now I would like to move on to the next subject, and the Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in 1968 and 69. The final confirmed Zodiac crime is the murder of Paul Stein, which took place on October 11th of 1969. This is the only time that the Zodiac Killer murdered a lone male, meaning that there was only one targeted victim, and he happened to have been a male. The Zodiac never once killed a female who was by herself. I mean, I just need to say that one more time. In the confirmed crimes, the Zodiac Killer never once killed a lone female. But Paul Stein was murdered on October 11th of 1969. He was a taxi driver in Presidio Heights, and I've been corresponding with someone named Dennis D., who I've interacted with in the past. He's the one who actually did a test of the Zodiac Killer's pencil flashlight, because in a previous letter prior to the murder of Paul Stein, the Zodiac Killer talked about how he was able to shoot victims in the dark by taping a pencil flashlight to the gun barrel, and that he would aim for the center of the light cone, more or less. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what the Zodiac Killer did. And some people in the comments section were saying, yes, that works. Other people were saying, no, that doesn't. And Dennis actually tried it out, and indeed, it did work in a video that he did. And one of the graphics that Dennis created went on to become one of the Zodiac Monday backgrounds, so big thank you to him. But what Dennis was saying was that he was listening to the Zodiac Killer channel's Interview with the Experts series, and he heard an interview with Richard Grindel that was conducted by me. I was also the host of that program, and Richard Grindel was talking about the discrepancy of the Presidio Heights shooting, because you have a lot of detectives that are on the scene. You have Donald Falk, most famously, but you also have Armin Pellicetti, and where are these people moving? Like, where is the killer moving? The person who murdered Paul Stein and the witnesses? Like, how does all of this play out? Because Dennis made some very critical things about Richard Grindel's observations. And my immediate response was that, okay, even if you don't want to hear the podcast version on the Zodiac Killer channel's Interview with the Expert series, I mean, I directed him to Richard Grindel's YouTube channel, and I'm going to play the video. And again, I encourage you guys to go over to Richard's channel as well. I mean, I'm playing the entire video clip because I want you guys to see it, and I want everything to be laid out and to make sense. But if you would like to use it as a reference, I invite you to go to his channel as well, because he is the creator of this, not me. And then I will look at some of the comments that were made by Dennis. One more time, this is called The Discrepancy That Is Presidio Heights.
Discrepancy called Presidio Heights. 2 units responded that night. 2 police units responded to a radio dispatch at approximately 9:58. But the crucial thing is that both police units got the call at the same time. Donald Falk and his partner Eric Zelms were here on Presidio Avenue. They'd just passed Washington Street at 9:58, and they went up to Jackson Street and turned west and travelled along here to the intersection of Jackson and Maple, where they saw a white male subject at around here. In fact, in the November the 12th memorandum, they said they last saw him turning up here into Maple Street, heading north. That journey time is 1 minute, which means if they got the radio broadcast at 9:58, they would have arrived here at 9:59. Now, we know that this journey from the cab to this position here is 3 minutes. Even Zodiac said, P.S. 2 cops pulled a goof about 3 minutes after I left the cab. So we know that this sighting of the white male subject was 9:59. So clearly, if we just backtrack, Zodiac left the cab at 9:56. This journey here along Cherry is 1 minute, which means if he left the cab at 9:56, he arrived here at 9:57. Now, on some Zodiac killer site forums, Zodiac forums, and Mike Rodelli's book, when Armand Pelisetti and Frank Pader arrived at the intersection of Washington Cherry, the three teenagers, or the kids, pointed out the Zodiac travelling up here, approaching the corner of Jackson and Cherry. Now, the problem is, we know Zodiac left the cab at 9:56, which means he would have been here at 9:57. How can Pelisetti have the Zodiac pointed out to him at 9:57 by the three teenagers when he didn't even get the broadcast till 9:58, and he still had to travel to the crime scene? So if it took him 1 minute to travel to the crime scene, there's a 2-minute discrepancy. This doesn't make any sense. If it took Armand Pelisetti and Pader 1 minute to get to the crime scene, in theory they should have got there at 9:59, being pointed out Zodiac at the top of Cherry at 9:59. But we know that Donald Fuchs took 1 minute to get to here, and he was spotting Zodiac here at 9:59. So you've got Zodiac in two different positions at 9:59. This doesn't make any sense. What also doesn't make any sense is Donald Fuchs' journey time to here is about a minute. It was no longer than 1 minute 30 seconds to get to the top of Cherry, where he supposedly in the 2007 documentary bumps into Armand Pelisetti, which means Armand Pelisetti would have had to get to the crime scene, have the Zodiac pointed out by the three kids, he had to escort them back to their alcove, check on Paul Stein, knowing he was 99.9% certain he was dead, take the description of the new description of the white male off the kids, tell Frank update the radio broadcast to the white male to all units, tell Frank Pader to secure the crime scene, and then, as he stated, using all his police practice, check all the alcoves and cars as he's travelling up Cherry, which is 90 seconds. Well, it only takes Donald Fuchs 90 seconds to get to here, and using all his police training and travelling this 1 minute journey really carefully would take him a minimum of 90 seconds. But he has done all these other things at the crime scene. In other words, from the radio broadcast to the point he gets here would be at least 4 minutes. Donald Fuchs' journey is only 90 seconds. They can't possibly meet. The only possibility is the 1989 Crime of the Century documentary, where Donald Fuchs clearly states he got the update here at Arguello. Realizing now why is he travelling here when he's supposed to be heading to the crime scene? He's supposed to come down here and head to the crime scene. After all, it was an assault and robbery on a taxi cab driver, so why was he getting the update here? He was going away from the crime scene. The only explanation could be Zodiac sent him there, realised he'd been duped by this white male who said there was a man waving a gun, running and waving a gun, pointing him in this direction. Donald Fuchs came up here, realising he'd been duped, and having last seen Zodiac walking up Maple, here, he came round into West Pacific Avenue, travelled down here, checked the area, came back. This would have been about 2.5 minute diversion, by which time then he met Armand Pelisetti. This is the only way this timeline can work.
And what I would like to say right now is something that has been shared by Dennis D. I am purely just reiterating his comments, and one of the motivations for doing this is he wanted to put this out on Black Box Online Radio on Zodiac Monday and get a response from Richard Grindel, and this will also be sent to him, because he's not trying to do anything other than simply dispute some of the findings associated with the Zodiac killer case. And the first is, in the video, Richard Grindel said very clearly that after the murder of Paul Stein, there was an APB, an all-points bulletin, all points bulletin that went out at 9:58 p.m. And the first thing that Dennis wanted to do was to go back and cite the documentary, this is the Zodiac speaking, from 2007, which stated that the all points bulletin should have gone out at 9:55. So immediately, that's 3 minutes. Because one thing that Richard is pointing out in the video is that a lot of things seem to be happening and a lot of people are moving around, and how could all of these people be moving to different places all at once? But what Dennis has tried to show is that, okay, there might actually be 3 minutes that could be added to the timeline. And here's a direct observation that was also made by Dennis. You also could add another minute based on the fact that not everybody who is recording these times would have synchronized their watches. And he fully admits that that is some type of, not exactly an assumption, but just a possibility, rather. Let's use the word possibility. So there could be 4 minutes that are added to the timeline. So there are these issues about why does it seem like the Zodiac Killer is in 2 places at once? Well, maybe he's not. Maybe this is actually just a bigger time frame than what some other people have thought about. So you have these 4 minutes that can be put into place. Then Dennis made another, I thought, an interesting observation about how the Zodiac Killer is getting away. The Zodiac Killer, as you see, is walking down the street, then he's going to make a right turn, going around the corner, and he proposes that the Zodiac actually went into the little alcoves of the street, and he was actually hiding there, and then people are walking up and down, and that's the way that he was able to avoid capture. There's a big theory that the Zodiac entered a park, or that he went into a house, he went into a residence, or that he got into a vehicle. Robert Graysmith even talked about that in his books, that he thought that the Zodiac murdered Paul Stein because he had a car stashed nearby. But there was this theory put forward by Dennis that he could be hiding in the little alleyways around the vicinity of the crime scene after making that right turn. Okay, but here's another major point of contention that was shared by Dennis, and that is that when Armin Pellicetti arrives on the site, on scene, then he's talking to the Robbins kids. He's learning the actual ethnicity of the killer, because they had thought that this person was black. The APB said to look for an NMA, Negro Male Adult, and they were under the impression that this person was a black man. But when he's talking to the Robbins kids and he's telling them to go back inside and wants to know which way the person went, he learns that it is a Caucasian male. And what Dennis proposed was all of that could have taken place within 15 seconds. And the evidence that he cites for this is that Dennis works in the prison system. I don't even want to misrepresent his title or something, but the Department of Corrections, he works for that. And he says that very frequently people have to go through these types of steps where they are extracting information from people and then they're moving down in one direction very quickly. So many different things that could have happened. It's just looking in one direction, looking at the victim in the cab, looking at the kids, telling them to go back inside. Which way did he go? And even by his own admission, Dennis said that could have taken 30 seconds and that he could have then just head onward down the street going after the Zodiac. But that's, I think, is one of the bolder claims, but I completely follow what he's saying. And it's not like we can go back in time and actually follow Armin Pellicetti with a stopwatch. I mean, I wish that we could. I wish that we could just go back and see who the Zodiac Killer was and learn all of this and just put a giant case closed stamp onto it, but we can't, so that's why we're trying to backtrack through the pieces of information. Now, when you were watching Richard's video clip there, you may have noticed that there was something that is very odd about the particular timeline, and that is that Donald Falk would have been walking down the street. He would have been in this crime of the century timeline, that is, he would have seen the Zodiac and he would have had to have gone down, then turned around, gone up the street, and then walked back down the street, what was called backtracking. That would have taken 2 minutes roughly. Now, even I thought that was weird. I mean, I completely understand what would have happened. The Zodiac would have pointed him in the wrong way, and then he is kind of walking in the wrong direction for, well, more or less what we said, 2 minutes in the video. But one point that Dennis also wanted to share is that why couldn't Donald Falk have just come back around in a loop as opposed to doing what's called backtracking, like coming full circle, even though it would be an ovular shape. But I was wondering that too. And the only thing that I could expect is that maybe there wasn't exactly a clear pathway for him to do so. But those are the big points that, number one, there could be 4 minutes added to the timeline that was not accounted for. So then it's actually just much simpler that the Zodiac commits the murder of Paul Stein, and he walks down the street and makes a right turn and is hiding in the alcove. Donald Falk is coming, Armin Pellicetti is coming. And that's why there is this very weird confusion, why all of these things are happening, and that it seems like someone's in two places at once. No, there was actually just more time for the person to commit the crimes. And if anybody would like to dispute anything in the comment section down below, you can write what you think. I would love to read your messages. And right now I would like to move on to the next segment here on Zodiac Monday, and I would like to give a shout out to Jeremy Berthoud, who contacted me at the email address BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com, and he wanted to talk to me about a book that he has written called So I See You Don't Paint Houses, which is about the Zodiac killer suspect Richard Gaikowski. This book is available through Dorrance Publishing, and also it is available on Amazon.com. And right now I would like to just read the description of this book. One more time, it's called So I See You Don't Paint Houses. The first ever book published about Richard Gaikowski's metamorphosis into the Zodiac Killer, his rise as a member of the New York Knickerbocker News and San Francisco Good Times, coupled with his descent into mental illness, illicit drug use, and lifelong feelings of envy and need for self-affirmation, help us as a society begin to comprehend the story. See how Dick Geik's life correlated to the canonical crimes of America's most wanted unknown murderer. I think that that's all just water under the bridge, Richard Gaikowski said to a friend while being recorded over the phone, not by the police, by his friend. Geik was a Pisces from Watertown, and I promise you that coincidence has nothing to do with the big picture. And one more time, this book was written by Jeremy Berthoud, and I'm going to be talking to him a little bit more, and we are going to keep the conversation going for a while, and perhaps this will turn into a larger segment on Black Box Online Radio, and I'm definitely going to read through his book and do a response here on BBOR, but also we'll have some comments from the author. One more time, So I See You Don't Paint Houses by Jeremy Berthoud, talking about Richard Gaikowski as a Zodiac killer suspect. And I would like to give a shout out to Stefan Nyberg, who has contributed a lot to Black Box Online Radio over the past couple weeks. And Stefan sent in a question to the email address blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com, and he said, have you watched the documentary Who the Zodiac Most Likely Is on the Bad Things True Crime channel? And the answer to that is yes. And it's, a reasonably well-made documentary, very well edited and put together, and Bad Things True Crime is a channel that I've referenced in a couple different episodes, because they're very flashy and they have a lot of good visuals. However, there are numerous errors that are shared in the documentary, and they also talk about some of the far-out suspects, such as Gary Francis Post very highly. They speak very highly of him, and they say that he is one of the top suspects, and of course I think rather to the contrary. But I thought that there could be a rather interesting mental exercise that we could do by going through the comment section on that channel and look at some of the claims that were made in the documentary. There was one line that was shared by the narrator, though, that serial killers often work in pairs, and numerous people wanted to respond by saying, no, they don't. And the answer to that is, very frequently, serial killers do work in pairs, and very frequently they do not. And some people were taking exception to the words often, frequently, but one person out here even wrote out, these are some examples of serial killers who worked in pairs. The Hillside Stranglers, the Beltway Snipers, the Moore's Murders, Starkweather and Fugate, Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, the Honeymoon Killers. Yes, there are lots of examples. I think that the majority of serial killers do not work in pairs, but last week on the channel I was just talking to you guys about the duct tape killer, and that would be an example of a serial killer who was trying to pull people into his world, and the duct tape killer was someone who more or less would have started a thrill kill club if he could have gotten away with it, but the authorities were able to apprehend him. Robert Leroy Anderson, a serial killer from South Dakota. And I mean, you could add in so many other people to this list, especially when you're looking at how serial killers have accomplices, like David Parker Ray, the toy box killer. He had an accomplice named Cindy Hendy, and Leonard Lake and Charles Ng also had a female accomplice named Cricket who was helping them commit those crimes. And it's not abnormal for a serial killer to work with somebody else. So when people are talking about these Zodiac killer partnerships or the thrill kill club, and they're saying, no, there can't be multiple participants. Oh, there can. There can. Now, I don't endorse any of those types of theories because I don't believe the evidence is strong enough to say so, but there can be theories involving multiple participants. and it's not completely out of line. And someone here has a comment about Mike Michaud, saying, Mike Michaud, the victim of the Blue Rock Springs shooting. Poor Mike, not only did he have the misfortune of being shot and watching his girlfriend die at the hands of the Zodiac Killer, but to add insult to injury, he keeps getting called Mr. Magoo. Yes, they were calling him Mike Magoo, actually, I think, in the documentary, but they're Mr. Magoo, that's true. But here's an important point, though. Mike Michaud, of course, was not Darlene Ferrin's boyfriend. Darlene Ferrin was married at the time to Dean Ferrin, so whatever was going on between Mike and Darlene, he was not the primary man in her life. And then we have a comment here that's actually a question. Wasn't Alan too jowly to match the sketches? Okay, I mean, I don't exactly know what you mean by jowly, but let's rephrase the question. Was Arthur Lee Allen too fat to be the Zodiac Killer? Was his face too round to be the Zodiac Killer? And in the past, I would have said absolutely yes. I was like, why are people looking at this guy, Arthur Lee Allen? He looks nothing like the witness descriptions. He looks nothing like the composite sketch. I mean, I do mean that. Arthur Lee Allen was 6 feet tall, and the witness description from the Blue Rock Springs shooting was 5 feet 8, 200 pounds, and that's 4 inches shorter than Arthur Lee Allen, but we have to remember that there are multiple witness descriptions, one of which would be Cecilia Shepard's sighting of the Zodiac Killer at Lake Berryessa, who spent a lot more time with the Zodiac than Mike Michaud did, and Cecilia Shepard estimated that the Zodiac was 6 feet tall and Allen was 6 feet tall. Now, he doesn't resemble the Zodiac Killer composite sketch after the Stein shooting, but, I mean, there are a couple explanations that were put forward by Graysmith. Graysmith thought that he was wearing a wig, and Graysmith also estimated that the Zodiac was much more moon-faced than people are giving him credit for, based on the fact that Mike Michaud could not make out any discernible features of the killer because he was blinded in his face by a flashlight and he's being shot at. So what he said was the only description that he could make about the killer was that his face was really big. That's the only facial feature that he could say. Therefore, a little bit more moon-faced. And somebody else also says here, though, on Bad Things True Crime, serial killers often work in pairs. You lost me there. And, I mean, the majority of serial killers are lone wolf types, but there definitely are serial killer partnerships. And we have another one that says, just like Jack the Ripper, it is solved every month with a new name. It really hasn't, though, because when you actually listen to the FBI and the authorities, they are very adamant when people come forward with suspects like Gary Francis Post and groups like the Case Breakers saying they've solved the case, as well as other people on forums saying that they've solved the case. The FBI isn't listening to that stuff, and they're saying that the investigation is open. So just because somebody proposes a suspect, it doesn't mean that the authorities are paying any attention to that. But this same comment also says, Arthur Lee Allen was also ruled out. Here is something else that is not true, because even though Allen's DNA did not match during the primetime ABC special that they did, okay, there's that famous story that Allen's DNA did not match. They also took his side palm print, and they compared it to one of the letters, a 1974 Exorcist letter, and that didn't match either, but that doesn't mean that he was ruled out or that he was exonerated or that he was completely eliminated as a suspect, because the majority of people that I've been talking to about the Zodiac Killer mystery are of the agreement that they don't have the Zodiac Killer's DNA. And I do mean that. I mean, when I have a whole episode about this called Do They Have the Zodiac Killer's DNA, which was mostly authored by Mike Rodelli. And I gave a few comments on that one, but there really is a convincing case that they lifted touch DNA from a stamp from one of the Zodiac envelopes, but that doesn't mean that they actually have the killer's DNA. Multiple pieces of DNA have been extracted from different Zodiac correspondences, but none of it matches each other. Therefore, they don't have the Zodiac killer's DNA 100%. So says me anyway. The next comment says that Richard Gaikowski's experience as a medic in the military tends to disqualify him as a suspect for me. Surely a medic or combat veteran would know about vital organs and what would kill a person. Okay, I thought the exact same thing in the past, but the counter-response to that is that, well, even a fool would know that if you slit somebody's throat, they have a higher chance of dying than stabbing them in the back. I mean, who knows why the Zodiac did what he did. And even if you don't accept that, look at the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs shooting. At the Lake Herman Road murders, the victims are ordered out of the car and David Faraday is shot in point-blank range. At the Blue Rock Springs shooting, Mike Michaud is shot multiple times in the front seat of the car, sprayed with bullets, committed in a very different way. And I do have to cite Tom Voigt for the analysis about the responding to the comment about how Richard Gaikowski's military training should disqualify him. He is the one who actually wrote that out for a previous episode of Black Box Online Radio. The next comment says, he might have been someone not on anyone's radar, similar to the Golden State Killer Joseph D'Angelo, who was hiding in plain sight, but I don't think we will ever know. Very good point. I mean, very good point. What Paul Holes said about the Golden State Killer mystery was he thought there were better suspects than Joseph D'Angelo, but it turned out that DNA matched, and Joseph D'Angelo was the Golden State Killer. And the next comment here says, I've done a lot of studying about this case, but honestly, I don't think any of the suspects that are popular were the Zodiac, and I'm positive it's not any of the more far-out theories like the Zodiac-Manson connection. I would love to see it solved, but I highly doubt that it will be. The Zodiac is probably dead and gone. Well, there's a very high chance that the Zodiac Killer is dead. I mean, 50-plus years have passed since the Zodiac crimes of the 1960s, but I am also hopeful that we will get a consensus and an answer. And actually, here's a comment from Jared Wignall, who's a longtime listener to Black Box Online Radio, who wrote into Bad Things True Crime and says, we may never know who the Zodiac was or is. While he may be one of the many suspects or persons of interest people have listed over the years, it's likely that he could have honestly been someone who was never a suspect and likely never even thought of being the Zodiac Killer, thought of being as the Zodiac Killer. Regardless, the Zodiac defiantly made it so the Zodiac definitely made it so nobody would forget about him, as people were still trying to figure out who he is to this day. And that is more or less just the honest point, that the Zodiac Killer case is unsolved, and people are still debating about how, is there even evidence to suggest that there are multiple killers? And I'm going to be very, very clear about some things. In this segment that I've been talking to you guys about for the last 10 minutes, I'm just exploring the possibilities, and I'm looking at counter-arguments and counter-claims that other people have made. I've been very critical of the comments that Robert Graysmith has made about the Zodiac Killer, and I tend to think that Robert Graysmith was fudging the facts in a lot of situations, to be very polite, but there are genuine counter-arguments that people can share in regards to the interpretations of the evidence. And sometimes I think that that's valuable when somebody's going to say something like, Arthur Lee Allen was exonerated. Well, no, he wasn't. I mean, that's more of just disputing a fact, though. And here's another one that says, they could get DNA from Paul Doer's daughter and compare it with the stamp on the letters to see if it matched any family markers of her DNA. What's weird is that it could have been two people. Maybe Ellen got involved and someone wrote the letters. Could have been a cop who wrote them and had a partner. Now, I've definitely thought about Arthur Lee Allen having a partner, and someone whom you guys know has discussed that has been Drew Beeson, author of Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer, as well as the host of the Zodcast. And what Drew Beeson has put forward is that Donald Lee Cheney was the Zodiac, but he mostly just views Arthur Lee Allen as a minimal participant, that Allen would have just provided a little bit of limited activity. And then I would like to go to the next comment here that says, the most amazing part of this story is that Paul Stein was 29 years old. The dude looked 50 at least. I honestly think that's Paul Stein's mustache. If you were to go through the comments section here on Bad Things True Crime, you will see that over and over again. I don't know why people are so fixated on this, but yeah, I thought about it the first time I saw a photo of Paul Stein, and then, okay, I put it out of my mind for the last how many years. I mean, yes, he looks older than 29 years old in one of the photos. In the photos of him without the mustache, though, he looks rather age-appropriate. There are too many suspects, and the inability to rule any of them out sadly means that we have no idea who the Zodiac Killer was. We are not any closer than we were decades ago. Well, I think a lot of the suspects that have been proposed will be ruled out very easily. Some of the suspects like George Hill Hodel, suspects like Ross Sullivan, Earl Van Best, they were not the Zodiac Killer, and people are just making up stories around them. And the next comment comes to us that says, mooning the cops on the Z videotape rules out whether or not he is the Zodiac. I think we should give him props for this. Mooning the cops on the Z videotape? What on earth is a Z videotape? Ken Maines is going to tear your head off, my friend. And the next one is, yet many serial killers have a sustained and quite a bad head injury in their younger lives. Yeah, that really is true. I mean, not only suspects like Lawrence Kane, whom he's referring to, but Alexander Pichushkin, the chessboard killer from Russia, also had a head injury. I mean, I'm sure you're even thinking of some serial killers now who had head injuries because it all relates to impulse control. The next one says, if they could find the Golden State Killer 5 years ago who was operating at the same time as the Zodiac, then they could find the Zodiac. Not so fast there, because firstly, the Golden State Killer did not operate exactly at the same time as the Zodiac. The Zodiac's crime spree was from 1968 to 69, as well as some possible other crimes. The Golden State Killer really did not operate until 1974 and went all the way to 1986. It's possible that the Golden State Killer committed one crime in 1973, and it's also possible that he resurfaced again in 90 something. It was with the Granite Bay murders, but the Golden State Killer came after the Zodiac, and also the Golden State Killer was a home invader. He tied up the victims, and he would steal things from the fridge, and he really liked to eat crackers and drink beer. So he's leaving behind all kinds of DNA, let alone that the Golden State Killer was a sex offender. The Zodiac did none of this, so there just simply is less DNA to examine. And the next comment says, this is the one case I would love to see solved in my lifetime. I'm not optimistic. They never found Jack the Ripper either. Well, I mean, there are a lot of very, very convincing theories that have been put forward about Jack the Ripper, and I've said this before on the Wednesday show that I think that the Ripper might actually be in the list of suspects, in the list of popular suspects, whereas I don't believe that the Zodiac Killer is actually one of the popular and widely discussed suspects. The next comment says, always thought Allen is the most likely, but Doers is a consideration. Meaning, of course, Paul Doer, the suspect that has been proposed by Jared Kobeck and is the subject of the book, How to Find Zodiac. Well, I'm probably going to disagree with you there. I mean, I think that more or less Jared Kobeck was just writing a book because he wanted to write a book about the Zodiac Killer. I know that's not an exciting story, but, I mean, that's more or less my take on the subject. And the next comment says, I think Gary Post is actually a very promising candidate for the Zodiac Killer. As for the Jack the Ripper case, there's a very compelling case for Charles Lechmere. Now, you get half credit because I have done 2 episodes on Charles Lechmere as a Jack the Ripper suspect. I can comprehend that narrative. I don't comprehend anything about the Gary Post narrative at all. I mean, like, Paul Doer is much higher on the suspect list than Gary Post. I was about to say the suspect post, than Gary Post. Got my words, thinking, but almost like a totem pole, so to speak. But no, Gary Post was not the Zodiac Killer. The case breakers just made up a bunch of crap, and Dale Julin actually seems like a legitimate researcher who works with them. And when I say legitimate, he has an articulate narrative. I don't think that it's correct, and it's still very far out and wacky. Like, he believes that you can extract paragraphs and paragraphs of text from the Zodiac Killer greeting cards, but he doesn't say how you can do it. I'm just simply not convinced. But if anybody would like to read these comments, you can go over to who the Zodiac most likely is in the documentary form on Bad Things True Crime, and they talk about a lot of the popular suspects. As I've said, some of them, Paul Doer, Gary Post, Arthur Lee Allen, and they also get into things briefly about the Zodiac Manson connection. And I would love to read your responses in the comments section down below. And right now I would like to get to the shout-outs on BuyMeACoffee.com. Anybody who makes a donation or contribution via BuyMeACoffee.com or the Super Thanks on YouTube will get a shout-out. And this week's supporter is Batman66. Thank you so much, and we look forward to a lot of your great comments in the sections down below. On Batman66 leaves great comments on all types of episodes, not only the Zodiac Monday episodes, but even on things for the Anything Goes Friday segment and the polling questions that come out. Always much appreciated. So, thank you. And right now I would like to share something that is a little bit different, but it is very relevant to several true crime cases, including the Zodiac Killer mystery. And I would like to give credit to the YouTube channel called Unseen for sharing the story of Loretta Jones. And, you're going to have to wait until the end to hear how everything is going to come together with this one. And there's an article about this over on ANETV.com. It's called How a Daughter Helped Convict Her Mother's Killer 46 Years After She Identified Him. On the morning of July 31st, 1970, 4-year-old Heidi Jones found the bludgeoned body of her mother, 23-year-old Loretta, on the living room floor of their Price home in Utah, and Price, of course, meaning Price, Utah. Little Heidi told the police Tom did it, and law enforcement zeroed in on an individual named Thomas Edward Egley, who briefly dated Jones. He was arrested for attempting to kidnap on the night of the murder a 10-year-old girl who lived in Jones's neighborhood, but the murder case was eventually dismissed for lack of evidence. It took 46 years for Egley to finally plead guilty to the Jones murder in 2016. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 years to life in prison. A Cold Case Files episode about the case was called Written in Blood, and it is available on A&E TV. It aired on March 18th of 2022. Heidi Jones Assay, that's the daughter, spoke with A&E True Crime about how it felt to finally get justice for her mother after so long. There's some additional information. The episode was called Written in Blood because she was actually able to write the letters T and O on the floor in her own blood, referring to Loretta. And there's some other info that was shared on the Unseen channel that a lot of time had passed. 46 years had passed, and Heidi Jones, the daughter, didn't even remember so many things about the case. She didn't even remember that she had been so adamant that it was an individual named Tom. As previously stated, Tom was not the boyfriend of Loretta Jones. They had gone on one date, and Loretta did not want to continue seeing him, but the evidence at the crime scene really showed something, that the killer was known to the victim. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of forced entry, no screams that were heard, and also no defensive wounds. And Heidi Jones even speculated that her mother was doing that because she didn't want to draw attention to Heidi. She didn't want to draw attention to her daughter, and she wanted to keep the killer away from her daughter by just staying silent or trying not to make noise. And it's that's just a very, very emotional statement. But the way that I said that everything would come together would be, I mean, we got to look at the evidence. It was somebody who was known to her. It was someone who was the prime suspect, someone who was arrested for the crime, and for some reason the judge thought that there wasn't enough evidence, so he was let go for a lack of evidence. I mean, everything about this guy, Thomas Egley, seemed like he should have been the real killer, and he was the real killer, and it's just, think about this in all of these high-profile true crime cases that we've been talking about. The Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, even the Long Island serial killer mystery. There's a prime suspect, and the suspect may have even been apprehended by the police at some point, but they have to have been let go because of a lack of evidence. I mean, in this example, with the Loretta Jones murder, it was that guy. He just got off, and he had 46 years of freedom, but ultimately he was caught. And one thing that wasn't shared in that A&E TV article is that somebody was actually wearing either a wire or some type of hot mic, and they got him to confess unknowingly to the crime, and that ultimately led to his conviction. But the other point that I would like to share with you is, after the murder of Loretta Jones, there was an attempted kidnapping of someone who also helped identify Tom Egley as the perpetrator. And what the authorities said in this Unseen episode was they thought that this could not be a coincidence. You have a murder and an attempted kidnapping happening, and it's so close together in such a short time frame, it has to be the same guy. Again, think about these true crime cases that I've just talked about. The Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, the Long Island serial killer. When there is a large amount of criminal activity and events happening in very close time frames as well as close geographic areas, it normally is the same perpetrator. So I think that this is perhaps not the most eye-opening case for the Zodiac Killer mystery, but it goes to show that sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct answer. It is the truthful answer. And maybe it doesn't give us answers as to who the Zodiac Killer was and all of the answers about the ciphers, but when we look at what activities did the Zodiac Killer actually do, and maybe think about some other true crime cases as well, the picture becomes a little bit simpler. And alright, I would like to thank everybody who has listened to this episode. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And I will be releasing a new Twitter page soon for the show. And always feel free to look at the book Killer on a White Horse. I said that there was a sequel to that coming out. But you can keep in touch. Facebook is a great way to do so. so I'm also going to be releasing the Black Box Online Radio shorts on the Facebook Reels page, and there is always BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, and I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.